Hi, welcome to Student Org Leadership Training. As a Student Org leader, you are going to learn all about different resources that are available to you and your Student Org members. My name is Jordan Holgerson and I'm from the RISE office. I am the current Program Manager of Peer Education and Outreach, and I'm here with my coworker, Emma.
Hi, I'm Emma. I'm from the RISE office as well, in a business manager role.
We're really excited to talk to you today, and we've got lots of good information. So let's get started.
If you haven't already heard of the RISE office, it stands for Risk Intervention and Safety Education. We're the central office for prevention education and health promotion for all students at Texas Tech.
Okay, so how do things apply to you as a leader? So we like to talk about this social ecological model. And the cool thing about this is it demonstrates exactly how information goes from you as a student org leader to your community and your society. So if you're the leader of a student org, and let's say that your peer group is your student org. So any information that you take from any of these modules or from any interaction that you might have that gives you more information as a student at Texas Tech and lets you know your resources starts with you. And we encourage you to take that information and take that to your peer groups or your student orgs and encourage them to spread that to the community and then that information to society. And it is through this social ecological model that you get to be the change that you want to see in this world, and you get the opportunity to empower your student org members so that they can be the change that they want to see in the world as well. So please take a few minutes to write 2 sentences that describe your student org. This can contain information like demographics, lifestyle, beliefs, if you're a part of FSL, or anything like that. Okay, so how does RISE fit in on at the Texas Tech campus? So what we do at RISE is essentially, we never want to tell you what you have to do or tell you what choices to make in your life, but we want to empower every Texas Tech student to live your most vital, meaningful life. And we do that through comprehensive prevention education. So what this means is we want to give you all of the information possible and available so that you can make choices for yourself and your life and your time here at Texas Tech and be safe in those choices.
Chances are you've probably already heard of the RISE office in some form or another. All students are required to do Voices for Change, which is mandatory prevention education modules. We have Radar Restart, which is alcohol and other drug prevention education and interventions. We have Radar Recharge, which is wellness coaching across campus for individual support. All of our staff is trained in mental health first aid. We do RAD self-defense training currently for female identifying students. We always have social events and in-office support, so if you see us around campus, be sure to stop by and say hello. We have free condoms and menstrual products at several locations that we'll get to in just a little bit, and we also do periodic STI testing. So we do a lot of comprehensive prevention education and comprehensive wellness at Texas Tech.
So Emma mentioned that we have free condoms and menstrual products all over campus, and this is a map of where you can find those things. So during this activity, please take a few moments to match the specific location of where you can find condoms to the correct building. For example, in Drain Hall, that matches to the 2nd floor outside of the RISE office. So go ahead and match those, and then you'll have a great understanding of where to find condoms all over campus.
In the RISE office, we based everything we do off of 8 dimensions of wellness using a wellness wheel. A wellness wheel is a tool for identifying dimensions of wellness in areas that might be lacking. Everybody's wellness wheel looks a little bit different, so everybody has strong suits in their wellness in areas that they could improve. So the different dimensions of wellness are physical, financial, educational, social, intellectual, environmental, spiritual, and emotional. And there's room to say that there's other areas like digital or multicultural dimensions of wellness. Our goal throughout this presentation and training is that you'll be able to identify some of the areas in your own life that you would like to improve and take steps towards achieving those wellness goals. To start off with your wellness, we're going to really get into stress management. It's going to be a big portion of what this training is, as it is a big portion of your time and the way that you cope and show up in relationships as well. So I want you to take a couple minutes and tell us what stress looks like and feels like for you. Now that you know what stress looks like for you, I want you to take a few more minutes and write down a few ideas of how this workshop might support your organization members when they're stressed and how it might equip you to support those members as well.
In the fall of 2022, it was found that 79.3% of Texas Tech students reported experiencing moderate or high stress within the last 12 months. This may not seem like a huge number of people, but if you think about the approximately 40,000 plus students at Texas Tech, 79.3% is a huge amount. And it is so important to really take a grasp and understand how many students are experiencing moderate to high stress. Now that we've introduced you to a little bit about what stress might look like for you, your org members, or TTU student population as a whole, let's talk about the stress curve. So what this looks like is you've got your y-axis and your x-axis, and essentially this measures and helps create a visual for you to understand where you're at in this stress curve. So we've got performance versus pressure. Therefore, let's take an example of when you are home for the summer and maybe you're not doing much and you're feeling really bored. You're going to be on this far low end of the stress curve. So your pressure is not going to be very high, and therefore your performance is not going to be very high. However, once the semester starts, maybe you are in a really good pace and you are getting things done and you're in this green stretch zone where your pressure is pretty high, but your performance is also really high, and it is providing just enough motivation to make you feel like you're thriving and that you're completing tasks in an efficient manner. However, if that pressure gets too high or stays really high for too long, then your performance declines dramatically, and then you reach this strain or burnout section. We do see a lot of strain and burnout at the end of semesters near finals time. As I mentioned, this green area of stretch and comfort is the ideal zone that you want to operate in. And this requires a balance of pressure and performance. Then we do want to mention this zone of delusion, which is going to be way over here with the yellow strain and the red burnout areas. So this zone of delusion, otherwise known as the panic zone, is the false belief that if you keep working harder, you will improve. Essentially, if you push that pressure and continue trying to make your performance higher and higher and higher without reducing any of the pressure, then that's actually going to do the opposite and affect your performance and pull it to the lower end. And that's where you can get to that burnout area and really begin struggling. The last thing on the stress curve I want you to know is that there are good signs of stress and bad signs of stress. So good stress is eustress, and this might look and feel like motivation, focus, and feeling grounded. And then those distress or bad stress signs might look like fatigue or exhaustion, anxiety, or trouble thinking clearly and forgetfulness. So it's really important to make sure what type of stress you have on you, whether good stress or bad stress, and where you are at on this stress curve. So please take a second and figure out exactly where you're at on this stress curve, whether you're in bore out, comfort, stretch, strain, or burnout.
We're going to go through the process of stress with an easy example. In the process of stress, you have a trigger stimulation, a stress response, and a stress outcome. An example of this is if you have an upcoming exam, it's a really important test and it's worth a lot of your grade. You have feelings of dread. This is your least favorite class and you don't know that you're well prepared. So now you have difficulty sleeping because this test might impact your GPA, and that's a big stress outcome. Chances are you experience more than just one stress response. In the last example, I just gave one stress response. However, there's many different things that you could be feeling whenever you feel stressed. You might have physical responses, emotional responses, relational responses, or cognitive or even spiritual responses. As you can see on this list, which is not exhaustive, there's a number of things that you can be feeling simultaneously. In this next activity, I want you to take a few minutes and really reflect on what you experience whenever you're stressed. Please write down and record 8 responses you feel across the stress response spectrum. Now that we're familiar with our stress responses, how do we improve our stress management skills? What's the most effective method of improving stress management? The first and maybe most important way that we improve our stress management skills is awareness.
Awareness is made of 3 interconnected components. So if you're a little confused on how awareness is going to help you become less stressed, we're going to break it down and go through all of these pieces. But the important thing to know is that your emotions, your thoughts, and your behaviors are all connected. Whether it be your emotions affect your behaviors or your behaviors affect your thoughts or whatever that might look like. These all play a role with each other and can affect each other, especially in the time of even one day. So if you wake up with certain thoughts, that's going to affect your emotions, your behaviors, and vice versa.
The way that we talk to ourselves, especially in stressful situations, matters. These negative thoughts are going to drive the actions and behaviors that we take and how we respond in a stressful situation.
This next example we like to talk about whenever it comes to breaking apart and understanding our thoughts is similar to being stuck in a box. So if you have certain thoughts that either start your day or that you're constantly referring to throughout the day that are negatively impacting you, something, for example, I'm not a smart person, you are trapping yourself in this box and not allowing yourself any growth away from that statement. So what are some potential outcomes of this limiting belief? So if we have, I'm not a smart person as our limiting belief, what might happen to us if we continuously keep ourselves stuck in that box? Well, you could potentially end up viewing and learning new information as pointless because you think you'll never be smart. Therefore, you're limiting yourself from taking on any new information and kind of cutting yourself off at the knees so that you can't grow further in that area. So another outcome is you don't put effort into schoolwork. Maybe you see that there's no point or that it's hopeless. You don't apply to that job. So having these limiting beliefs can prevent you from taking risks and taking steps that could further your ambition or your career or your schooling, whatever that might look like for you. Another limiting belief that could become an outcome is that you're unable to reach your full potential. If you continuously think that you only fit into one category or you're only able to accomplish so much, you're going to not ever be able to overcome those limiting beliefs. So we just finished talking about our box example whenever it comes to limiting beliefs. So I would like you to take just a moment to self-reflect, really dive into your thoughts and that inner monologue that you have going on. It may be hard to identify some limiting beliefs, but really work to try and come up with at least one that you have about yourself.
Our beliefs about ourselves can go into 2 different categories, whether this is a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. A fixed mindset is going to be some of those limiting beliefs where we're really negative towards ourselves. Whereas a growth mindset is going to be a more positive way that we interact with ourselves and the situations that are presented to us. A fixed mindset is going to be something like, I made a bad choice and I'm stuck with it. On the other hand, this growth mindset is going to be, I embrace the lessons that I've gained from this experience. One of them defines you and the other one sets you free, so to speak.
So you might be thinking, Okay, you've done all of this talk about changing your mindset, but that's not really the easiest thing in the world to do. And you're absolutely right. So we want to give you some tools and ideas on how to shift your mindset from that fixed mindset area to a growth mindset. So that first option that we have is affirmations. Now, when you do these affirmations, it might feel a little silly, but what I recommend is finding some affirmations. You can get them on Google, Pinterest, whatever works for you, and put them by your mirror. So when you get up in the morning, start your day with those affirmations. It might seem ridiculous at first, but I promise after a while, that repetition and that continuing routine is really going to start to sink into your thoughts. Next, check out your coping mechanisms. We're going to talk quite a bit about this later, but check in those and see if they're truly serving you. The next on the list is perspective and self-empathy. We will also talk about these more as we continue, but being able to shift your perspective is so important. It is super easy to get stuck in tunnel vision and not be able to see outside of your situation. And being able to take a step back and look at the big picture can be really relieving. Also, accountability is this last opportunity to change your mindset, is find friends to help you hold yourself accountable and to be able to check in on your growth mindset journey.
This next portion is really going to set us up for talking about emotional literacy. Turns out that we're not actually very good at being able to identify our emotions, especially in the moment as we feel them. Emotions are simply communication. There's no good or bad emotions. Some of them are more difficult to identify and they cause discomfort, but all emotions are informative. We have something happening in our bodies or in our minds, and so our systems are communicating with each other saying, this doesn't feel right, this doesn't feel good, but this is a really great experience. There's two main types of emotions here. There's going to be primary emotions and secondary emotions. Primary emotions are how we react to events and situations. This is going to be feeling sad when somebody breaks up with you. This is going to be your body's first response that alerts you of your needs. It comes on strongly, it comes on quick, doesn't typically last very long, and those are those big emotions that we do typically know how to identify. Anger, fear, sadness, disgust, surprise, anticipation, trust, or joy. On the flip side, secondary emotions are reactions to primary emotions. This might be feeling shameful about being sad. So at this point, we've already deemed sad as a bad emotion when we've already talked about how this is simply a form of communication within yourself. Secondary emotions are going to be rooted in our belief system. It's typically a learned behavior, which means that it can be unlearned. They last longer than primary emotions, and there's those ones that sit in and feel really deep. Some examples of these are guilt, shame, confusion, resentment, frustration, and remorse. All these examples that I just gave are negative, but there's positive secondary emotions as well. In this next section, I have a couple questions for you that I want you to think about. What's a situation in which you've experienced a primary and secondary emotions? Can you identify both of them? What was your primary emotion and what was your secondary emotion in that situation?
So we're going to talk about this really useful tool. Emma mentioned that there are some emotions that are easy for us to identify, and these are typically the emotions that we get told a lot when we're children. And you can think of these emotions as buckets. When we're children, we are given 5 to 6 big bucket emotions, and that's going to be around this middle ring in the graphic. So that's going to be joy, trust, fear, surprise, sadness, disgust, anger, or anticipation. These are the ones that are instilled in us in an early age. But then as we grow and our brains become more complex, it becomes incredibly important to be able to identify more complex emotions. So using this graphic, if you want to look at emotions that are rooted in those main emotions that we just talked about, but you're like, oh, I'm actually feeling this emotion, but it's more intense, you can move towards the center of this graphic. So for example, If you're feeling joy today, but it's really intense, you might consider calling it, oh, I'm in a state of ecstasy. However, if maybe the emotions are less intense, you're still joyful, but just a little bit calmer, maybe you can describe that as serenity, and that can even cross over into other areas of the graphic. So what I want you to do, because this will be important for you later, is take a picture of this emotions wheel on your phone. There's also a lot of research around this particular wheel of emotions, so feel free to check out or even Google Plutarch's Wheel of Emotions to find out more information.
We're going to practice identifying some of these emotions a little bit better. So everybody's pretty familiar with anger. It's something that comes on really strong. It's one of those primary emotions. It's a primary response. So anger is maybe not always the thing that you're feeling. There could be multiple different things under this iceberg that you feel. You might actually be really sad, and it's easier to be angry than it is to feel sad. Or you're maybe anxious. Again, you're feeling stressed, and so it's easy to have a really short fuse and take it out on somebody else. Maybe you're hungry. Maybe you haven't actually nourished your body in a way that feels right and good for you. So you're starting to have some of that brain fog, and again, that really short fuse that feels like anger. So you can look at this iceberg and see that there's a number of examples that actually might fall under the category of anger when the situation is actually something different.
We want to talk about empathy versus sympathy. These are words that often get used interchangeably, but they actually mean very different things. And I want to let you know that empathy can also be used for yourself. And it doesn't always have to be something that you show outwardly to others. We will talk more about self-empathy as we go on, but keep that in the back of your mind. So, what are the exact differences? Let's start with sympathy because this is the one that we probably hear the most, receive the most, and give the most. So having thoughts about what someone's feeling. So say someone shares something incredibly vulnerable with you, and you're thinking more about how and what that person is experiencing. So when in conversation, sympathy can look like giving unasked advice, or it can look like passing judgment. Sympathy also allows you to only notice the surface level issue that that person's trying to explain to you. Sympathy is also understanding only from your perspective. We talked a little bit about perspective earlier, and so this is a good opportunity for you to step back to understand the bigger picture. Sympathy looks like ignoring or suppressing your own emotions, which a lot of times people think that in order to support someone else, you have to put your own emotions aside, and that's not accurate, but we're going to tell you about that in just a second. And then lastly, sympathy comes from our reactions, from our own emotions. When someone tells us something that makes us angry or sad for them, typically we react and say things that are based from what we're experiencing from what that person just told us. So we want to shift to empathy. Empathy is more effective for driving human connection and understanding. So when you are responding empathetically, you're going to feel what someone else feels, and you're going to actively listen to what they have to say without judgment. Empathy also is going to involve you seeking to understand and connect and discover that person's perspective. So, like I mentioned, take that step back and check out that bigger picture. Next, empathy involves acknowledging everyone's feeling, including your own. So increasing that emotional intelligence comes in handy at every step. Lastly, empathy comes from a place of curiosity. You're curious to understand more about that person's experience and what emotions might be coming up for yourself as well. This is all based in responses rather than reactions, and we'll talk more about that. So what I would like you to do is we have a few scenarios that we're going to give you in just a moment. A lot of these scenarios are going to involve someone responding in a sympathetic way. What I would like you to do is write an empathetic response that can be reframed. For example, the scenarios might have an issue where you're talking to one of your org members. Maybe do your best to reframe it in an empathetic way rather than a response with sympathy.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you can climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
One of the most effective ways that we can actually help ourselves in stressful situations, or even situations that feel uncomfortable for us, is practicing self-compassion. This is self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. Self-kindness is being warm and kind to ourselves in the face of failure rather than punishing or demeaning ourselves. This is the sense of, would you talk to one of your best friends the same way that you're talking to yourself? Common humanity looks like the idea that we're not alone and that suffering and feelings of personal inadequacy are something most of us share. You take something, for example, where you feel really alone, you feel unseen, you feel unheard. More than likely, there's other people experiencing that same emotion, possibly even in the same situation. Being mindful about these things, how you speak to yourself, if you're isolating yourself saying, this is something only I feel, nobody else understands this, is actually going to do you more good than it does harm. So this is not taking too much responsibility for feelings and emotions, not getting stuck in obsessive thought patterns, and awareness about breaking negative cycles. So these are all really big words about what we do and what we feel, but this goes back to that baseline. The emotions are just communications amongst the systems in our body. This really moves us into the area of healthy and unhealthy coping mechanisms. And you can see on what we've posted here, we say getting new tattoos or piercings or coloring your hair isn't actually a method of dealing with your moods. It could be. The point here is, are you actually addressing what the root cause is? We're going to move right into how all of this affects your behaviors. Jorgen mentioned having reactions versus responses. Reactions are going to be knee-jerk in the moment and kind of instantaneous. It's going to be trigger-based, driven by subconscious beliefs with little to no consideration of long-term effects, and it's going to be survival-oriented, and it's normally a defense mechanism. If you're having a response instead of a reaction, it's going to be slower. It's going to be more measured. You can self-regulate. So if you're really feeling tense in a moment, you're having an argument or a heated discussion with somebody, and it's getting to the point where you feel you're getting really defensive really quickly. This is where you can say, I'm going to take a moment and step back here. Let's pick this conversation back up later. You're regulating yourself. It's driven by both subconscious and conscious beliefs that you have and that you've worked to build and practice for yourself. This is a really big component that is very difficult, as it does take a lot of practice sitting in things that make you feel uncomfortable. When you respond to something, you have consideration of the long-term effects. How is this going to affect my relationship? Am I going to be proud of how I responded here? Am I saying or doing things that I regret? Typically, whenever you're responding instead of reacting, there's going to be a barrier there where you can filter out some of those thoughts. Responses are always oriented in well-being of self, others, and your own core values. It's important to note here that your core values might be very different than somebody else's, but you can control what your responses are, even if they can't control theirs.
So the next piece in understanding our behaviors is talking about coping mechanisms and making sure that we can assess our coping mechanisms for how effective they are to helping us and how healthy they are. So what you need to do first is think about an example of a coping mechanism. So we have one here on the screen that the first thing you want to do is identify the cause of what you're feeling. So in our example, you had a heated argument with a friend. Next, you want to narrow down the feeling that you're experiencing after the identified cause. So in this example, it is a feeling of frustration. Next, you want to feel, process, and release that emotion through your coping mechanism. So your identified cause is you had a heated argument with a friend, so you're feeling frustrated, and now you're going to vent to somebody that you trust. Lastly, you want to assess that coping mechanism for the following items. So was it effective? Was it safe, controlled, and healthy? Also, did you process or avoid the feelings in this process? So I want you to take a few moments to think of a time that you needed to use one of your coping mechanisms and answer the following questions about them. What caused the feeling that you were experiencing? What were you specifically feeling? You can use the picture that we had you take of the emotions wheel on your phone earlier to narrow down your feeling to something more specific. Next, what is the coping mechanism you're using, and explain how you feel, process, and release your emotion with that coping mechanism. And assess your coping mechanism with the following questions. Was it safe? Was it controlled? Is it healthy long-term? Did it allow you to process your feelings? And then did it just allow you to avoid your emotions? So take a few minutes to complete that activity. So now that you've completed your activity in analyzing your coping mechanism, let's talk about some other examples. So there are different areas of coping mechanisms. First, and typically one of the more popular ones, is a social coping mechanism. So this could be venting to someone or getting together with friends. Another popular area is physical coping mechanisms. So whether you cry it out, go for a walk, get some intense physical activity in, such as exercising, dancing, boxing, or getting a solid workout in, those all fall under physical coping mechanisms. There's also creative, so listening to music, writing, coloring, painting, or drawing would all fall under that. Or relaxing, like taking a warm bath or shower, or watching your favorite show or movie. Now, of course, this is only a small amount of possible coping mechanisms, so feel free to brainstorm a little bit and come up with ones that you might use that might not be on this list.
The RISE office focuses on harm reduction across the boards, whether this is with alcohol and substance use or in other behaviors or other coping mechanisms. I'm going to talk to you about alcohol consumption and reducing the risk with alcohol specifically. Alcohol is a common substance that college-age students engage in, though not everybody is choosing to drink. That's an important thing to note, is just because you choose to drink doesn't mean that everybody else does, or that not everybody is drinking to the same level all the time. A couple of things here that we really need to get into before we can kind of assess alcohol consumption overall is a standard drink size for each type of alcohol. As you can see on the screen, there's different levels using a red Solo cup as a depiction. Very, very bottom line is liquor, the next one up is wine, and the next one up is beer. These standard serving sizes are going to be based on the amount of alcohol content per container, per drink. So the higher the alcohol percentage, the lower the standard serving size is going to be. So beer is about 12 ounces. This is going to be your typical can, right? It's going to have about 5% alcohol content. Wine is going to be in the middle. It's going to be about 5 ounces. Most wines start about 12% alcohol content. And liquor is going to be anything that's 80 proof or 40% alcohol content. So serving of liquor is going to be a standard shot, which is 1.5 ounces. If you're just looking at beer versus liquor, there's about 10 times more alcohol in a standard serving of liquor versus beer. That's a really significant difference. So measuring and knowing the standard drinks that you've had and that you've consumed is going to be one of the most important parts of harm reduction when it comes to alcohol. This next section, I have a few questions for you that you need to answer. They're going to be the legal limit of alcohol content to drive in Texas if you're 21 or over, the legal limit BAC of blood alcohol content in Texas if you're under 21, how many standard drinks are in a typical Long Island iced tea, and how many standard drinks are in a 25.4 ounce bottle of wine. Another component of reducing the risk and minimizing harm when it comes to alcohol consumption is knowing your BAC, or your blood alcohol content. There's 4 factors that go into calculating your BAC. It's going to be your biological sex, or your sex assigned at birth, the number of standard drinks you've had in a certain amount of time, and your body weight. Those are the 4 factors that go into calculating your BAC. As you can see in the chart, there's 2 different charts for the binary sexes assigned at birth, and you can look at the differences here. There's a few things that I want to point out as far as the differences on these 2 charts go. Some of the similarities that you can see is that they're all color coordinated. There's an area of green, goes on the gradient to yellow, all the way to red. Red denotes a more dangerous or a higher risk level when it comes to your drinking or your BAC. At the green level, this is where you have minimal coordination and judgment affected, and it increases the closer you get to the red. A few things to point out here is that for every hour, your BAC, you can subtract 0.015 for every hour, including the first one that you're drinking. And this is important to consider this actual standard number of drinks that you've had and not the number that you feel like you've had. So it doesn't take very long at all for somebody to start feeling the effects of alcohol. Somebody weighs 100 pounds. In this instance, let's look at the male's chart. A male weighs 100 pounds. He's had 2 drinks in the first hour. His BAC is going to be at 0.07. Take a female who weighs 100 pounds, has had 2 drinks in the first hour, and her BAC is going to be 0.09. You can say 0.02, that's not a huge difference, right? If you follow down that column all the way down, where they've both had 14 drinks, which is a really dangerous level for anybody to be drinking at, this is alcohol poisoning for these 2 individuals, the male's BAC is going to be at 0.51, and the female's is going to be at 0.63. That's a really big difference. So you can see here on this chart how this measures up against each other. It's really important to know these things. For one, to never go drink for drink with somebody else, especially somebody of the opposite biological sex. That difference is going to be astronomical, right? This also plays to your impairment, your ability to give consent, and your ability to get yourself home safely, and then also the levels of intoxication, whether or not you're blacking out as well. I know the last activity asked you a few questions about your BAC, so it's important to note that 0.08 is the legal limit to drive if you're 21 or over in Texas. And Texas has a zero tolerance policy as far as driving at all with any alcohol in your system if you're under 21. So it really does not take very much for you to get to this level. A major element of alcohol consumption is knowing when to intervene when somebody's had too much. There's possibilities that you found yourself in this position, or that you know somebody who has been in this position where you're not sure if you actually need to get help or if it's something that can be handled by a sober party. So it's important to call 911 at any time you see the signs of alcohol poisoning. There's an acronym for this. It's called MUST HELP. And this denotes any of the areas where alcohol poisoning might be present in a situation. If there's mental confusion, unresponsiveness, snoring or gasping for air, throwing up, hypothermia, erratic breathing, loss of consciousness, or paleness or blue skin, these are all signs that somebody is in immediate danger and that you need to call emergency services. While on the time you're waiting for somebody to get emergency help, you can move them into a recovery position. So this needs to be where they're unable to sit up by themselves, and you go ahead and you support them while they're laying on their head with their leg crossed over their body, and the knee stops them from rolling onto their stomach. So they should be laying on their side here. It's important to note that Tech does also have an amnesty policy. In any given situation, student safety is always going to be the top priority at Texas Tech. So even if you're illegally under the influence, maybe you're underage drinking, or your BAC is too high as well, if somebody is in need of medical attention, you will not get in trouble for calling the police or intervening and helping somebody in danger. This is something that we're trying to do to ensure that across the boards, campus is a safer place for all students, regardless of the situation. This next section is we're going to go over a few bystander intervention questions that are good things for you to know should you be drinking or anybody you know be drinking. A lot of the questions are going to be true or false, and there's also going to be a short answer that follows. Let's talk about ways that if you do choose to consume alcohol, you can do it in a safer way. When I say drinking in a safer way, this does not mean that you're not able to have fun at all if you do choose to enjoy an alcoholic beverage every now and then. This is just to ensure that you're doing it in a less risky way that still optimizes your ability to have fun and stay safe. Couple of things: knowing your tolerance and your BAC. Tolerance is different than BAC because your tolerance builds up in a way where your body is adjusting to the amount of alcohol that you're regularly consuming. So just because you feel like you have a high tolerance doesn't necessarily mean that your BAC is low. The two are entirely uncorrelated. So always know what your BAC is to maintain a safe level and a responsible drinking level. Measure drinks and know a bartender's pour. So measuring drinks goes back to knowing the standard amount of drinks that are in each type of alcoholic beverage. You might be drinking cocktails that has multiple types of alcohol in it and therefore multiple standard serving sizes of alcohol. Avoid pre-made drinks. Across the boards, don't take drinks from people that you don't know and that you didn't watch them make. And pre-made drinks specifically is referring more to cocktails or something in a party situation where you're not able to see what's in the drink. This does not apply to things that are already in its own container, like bottled or canned drinks, unless they were not opened in front of you. Watch out for drinking games and chugging. This is a surefire way to drink more than you probably intended to going into the situation. So drink matching or even playing games with somebody of the opposite binary sex is going to put the person who weighs the least and potentially, if it's a woman, in a much riskier situation. And make your own decisions. A lot of this is going back to knowing your BAC, knowing where you feel safe, and knowing what to do and who you can rely on situations that if you do drink too much, you're still in a place where you're not putting yourself in harm's way or there's accountability with the group that you have. The next activity for this is going to be identifying some other methods that you know to reduce your risk or reducing the risk around the people with you. It's important that we talk about alcohol consumption, one, for safety, but it's also commonly used as a coping mechanism, especially when we're trying to escape from a situation, be a little bit numb. This goes back to our behaviors and choosing things that feel healthy and productive for us. So whatever you're inputting is what is going to be the output. If you're inputting patience and grace, you're going to have a much better outcome than if you are unkind to yourself and not practicing self-empathy. So this goes back to your thoughts and your actions kind of dictate your behaviors in a cycle.
So we've talked about a lot of areas of wellness. Another huge and important area to talk about is relationships. Now, on this slide, we have several different qualities of an unhealthy relationship and qualities of healthy relationships. And now this can be applied in romantic relationships, platonic relationships, familial relationships, and the relationships between you as a student org leader and your org members. So the first thing is looking at the unhealthy signs of a relationship. So that might be intensity. So maybe someone's moving way faster than you're comfortable with. Possessiveness, manipulation, also gaslighting falls under manipulation. Isolation, or limiting your contact or discouraging you from spending time with friends and family. Sabotage, or trying to ask you to miss things that would harm you reaching your goals, like asking you to skip class or skip work or skip workouts, things like that. Belittling, calling you names, or making you feel bad about yourself. Guilting, making you feel bad about what you are doing or what choices you've made. Volatility, this one really looks like going from 0 to 60 really fast. It's going to also look like dangerous driving or any type of outburst of violence. Deflecting responsibility, this is where someone is never taking responsibility for their actions, words, or decisions. And then betrayal, and this can look like a lot of different things. I think the one that students most likely go to is cheating, but also if there is any line and boundary of trust and that trust is purposefully broken, that is a betrayal. Healthy signs look like moving at a comfortable pace, trust, honesty, independence, where you can both be your own people and everyone has an opportunity to have their own interests and own identities. Respect, equality, kindness, healthy conflict, accountability, and of course fun. Relationships should be something that adds to your life and doesn't take away. So if at any point that you're realizing that your relationship has moved more into the unhealthy time, maybe it's time to reassess and check in with your partner or partners.
Another important component of stress management is knowing if you're in a survival mindset versus a thriving mindset. This is very similar to fixed versus growth mindsets and also reactions versus responsive. There's a unhealthier and a healthier version on both sides. Surviving is going to be driven by fear. You have a flight or freeze response in your body. You feel like you're in danger, so you always have high stress levels or high cortisol in your body. Your logical decision making kind of shuts down. This is where the fight, flight, or freeze situation comes into play, where you're not thinking about anything else except what is immediately in front of you. What are you going to do? How do you respond? You have an accelerated heart rate, and your verbal communication is potentially challenging. You might not be able to say, I'm feeling this in this situation, and this is what I need. Thriving is going to be driven by growth and acceptance. You can say, what can I learn from this? There's that growth mindset coming into play. You have a sense of purpose and safety and security in a situation, right? There's conscious ability to rationalize. So you are able to logically think through decisions, think through outcomes, think through different scenarios, and then choose the best route for you based on the information you've been given. You'll have a stable heart rate, your breathing, and then you have the ability to embody patience, empathy, and inclusivity for yourself and for other people. So thriving versus surviving can be momentary, and then it can also be on a more long-term scale. Think I've been in survival mode for a really long time versus like that person's thriving, they're living their very best life. Checking in with a quick question for you. In order to thrive, you have to practice what? In order to thrive and to be in a consistent place of thriving, you must practice self-empathy.
So a lot of you probably relate to this meme. How many of you set an alarm for 7 a.m. at 3 a.m.? But let's take a look at how sleep can affect when we're awake. So 47.2% of Texas Tech students in 2022 reported getting less than 7 hours of sleep regularly. This is a large problem because adults need about 7 to 9 hours of daily sleep for proper cognitive and behavioral function. So if you're getting less than 7 hours of sleep, you're probably not functioning at the optimal level that you could be.
Taking care of yourself ensures that you're also getting enough sleep. Sleep affects so many systems in our body that whenever we're not sleeping, it makes total sense that we're not able to regulate ourselves and our bodies. So what actually happens whenever you're sleeping? You have memory storage, you have reorganization, restoration, you're recharging, your body's removing and processing through toxins, and you're able to maintain normal function. On the other hand, lack of sleep impairs your reasoning and your ability to problem solve, attention to detail and concentration, memory creation and storage, judgment and your learning capabilities, your ability to regulate your mood, and your ability to respond quickly or react versus respond. So a lot of really important things are happening in your body whenever you're sleeping, and if you're not getting enough sleep, you're only cutting yourself short in your ability to take care of yourself and function in a way that benefits you and allows you to be your best self.
What happens if you're not sleeping well? Well, there's a lot of different things that when you deprive your body from sleep, things start getting a little out of line and going a little haywire. And it is so incredibly important to physical changes in your nervous system, as well as your cognitive abilities and your overall mood and happiness when you're not getting enough sleep. So, meaning that lack of sleep can contribute to heightened stress and anxiety levels.
We're going to talk about some tips that set you up for better sleep. More than likely, you've probably heard all of these things, but we're going to talk about them anyway, just in case you haven't. It's important to create an appropriate setting where you feel comfortable and you can relax all the way. This might look like making the room as dark as possible. Condition your brain for sleep. Maybe you don't use the bed to work or do your homework in, you're not having meals in your bed, or you're working in a space where you're trying to tell your body, this is where I relax, this is where I can recover and restore myself. Reduce stimulation. This might be TV, phone, music, or looking at your phone first thing in the morning. Another element of being able to get really good high quality sleep is staying hydrated throughout the day. And then don't create a dependent sleep cycle. So it looks like minimizing alcohol consumption or other substance use right before you're going to sleep, or doing a bedtime routine, so to speak. If you're getting active during the day, your body is going to be more tired as well, where you're able to go to sleep quicker and stay asleep and stay in a deeper sleep. And all of this kind of creates a routine around what actually feels good for you. So going to bed and waking up at the same time every day. Maybe this looks like you shower and then you have a skincare routine, or you take your medicine and go to bed, or you meditate at night. Could be a number of any things in it. What matters is that the routine works for you.
When we talk about mental health and stress management, we also need to talk about suicide prevention. This is an ongoing conversation that is incredibly important and requires a lot of different aspects, including bystander intervention. So I want to give you all a brief content warning. In this next section, we will be talking about mental health conditions and suicide education. So if you need to pause the video or get a glass of water or anything like that, please feel free to take care of yourself. And if at any point you need extra support, feel free to reach out to the RISE office. And then you'll also see information for the crisis helpline available to you here at Texas Tech.
As we've mentioned and hinted at before already in these modules, your mental health is such a vital component of your well-being. So, road to healing with your mental health, whatever this looks like, includes awareness, acceptance, and action. So, awareness is all of those things that we talked about: emotional literacy, doing the reflection, and identifying those stress responses that you have in certain situations. Accepting, practicing that self-empathy. So you're learning, you're growing, and you're able to stay positive in those situations. And there's action associated with this, where you can be present and you create new habits, and all of this leads to learning how to take care of yourself and be able to show up the way that you want to. When we talk about mental health, there's a lot of things that might come to mind. This next activity is going to test your ability a little bit to kind of match different things happening when we think about mental health. You're going to identify stress, nervousness, distress, anxiety, and an anxiety disorder. It's okay if you get the answers wrong, because we'll go through the answers in just a minute. Stress is a response to an external cause, like a tight deadline at school or having an argument with a friend. Stress subsides when the situation has been resolved. Nervousness is a natural response to a stressful event. It's a temporary emotion and resolves once stress has passed. Distress occurs when stress is severe and prolonged, or sometimes both. Anxiety is a person's reaction to stress. Its origin is internal. Anxiety is typically characterized by a persistent feeling of apprehension or dread in situations that are normally non-threatening. Unlike stress, anxiety persists even after the immediate concern has passed. An anxiety disorder is more severe escalation of anxiety diagnosed by a professional. Anxiety disorders include generalized anxiety, panic disorder, phobias, social anxiety, OCD, and PTSD.
So similar to the last activity that you just did, you're going to match the following keywords to the correct definitions. On this end, as we were talking about anxiety and mental conditions like that, now we're going to be talking about sadness, situational depression, clinical depression, and suicidal ideation. Now that you've done the matching activity, let's talk about the definitions of each of these. So sadness is a normal reaction to loss, disappointment, problems, or difficult situations. Sadness is something that everybody experiences, and this can be a reoccurring experience. It is absolutely normal and okay to feel sadness. Next is situational depression, or an adjustment disorder with depressed mood. This is a short-term form of depression that occurs as the result of a traumatic event or change in a person's life. Situational depression stems from a struggle to come to terms with dramatic life changes. This is also incredibly common and can happen at different times of the year, or maybe surrounding different times of grief, or even just big changes in life that takes a while to adjust to. The next one we want to talk about is clinical depression, or also known as major depressive disorder, or MDD. This is a mood disorder diagnosed by a professional that is more severe than situational depression. This is a mental illness that affects mood, personal understanding of oneself, and the understanding and relation to the world. Typically, clinical depression is ongoing, and it can be treated and well managed with a professional. Suicidal ideation involves having some having thoughts about ending one's life, having methods or plans to do so, or feeling that people would be better off without them. Depression, anxiety, and substance use, especially when unaddressed, increase risk for suicide. Suicidal ideation can be independent of other stages. So all of these different terms can be independent or go hand in hand with each other. It is important to know the difference between these so that you can understand whenever it is time to seek a professional's help.
The next section of this module is going to be pretty heavy. We are going to talk about suicidal ideation and suicide completion. If this is something that's really concerning to you or something that you yourself have experienced or you know that somebody else who has, there are resources on campus to support you in this. However, it is a really important topic and it's important that we talk about it. In doing so, we're able to spread the message, get people access to resources, and save lives. So 33% of tech students tested positive for a significant risk of suicidal behavior during a suicidal screening in 2022. So this is 33% of tech students who did test positive for this. This does not mean that it's only 33% of tech students who experience this, right? This is only ones who responded to this screening. So that's a significant number of people. That's a really large number of people on campus and in our communities that are experiencing this hurt and loss and devastation where they don't feel like they have other options. So with this, it's really important that we reflect on how we want ourselves and our community and our friends and our peers to be successful in their time here at Texas Tech and beyond. So take a few minutes to reflect and write out ways in which you want your specific org members to be successful without being tied down by something so severe like suicidal ideation.
She seemed like she was having a hard time fitting in.
I don't remember many people asking them to hang out.
She took the breakup really hard.
Things weren't the same after she failed that first test.
He worried a lot about disappointing his parents.
He started having a hard time after he got bad news from home.
She started pulling away and wouldn't hang out anymore.
Every time I came home from class, she looked like she'd been crying.
I knew something was up when he gave away his grandpa's watch. He had always told me how much he loved it.
I was worried about him because he hardly ate and was always sleeping.
They even stopped doing the things they loved.
She started drinking almost every day.
He even tried to sell some of his stuff.
I also noticed that she posted weird messages on social media, like, soon this will all be over.
She said she just wished she could go to sleep and not wake up.
They said they were tired of feeling lonely.
She told me that she felt really hopeless about pulling her grade up.
He said he wished he could disappear so he wouldn't be a burden to his family.
He said that I didn't have to worry about him next semester.
I was always taught to mind my own business. Everyone is stressed when they start college, right?
A couple times, I almost tried to talk to them, but didn't because I figured someone else would.
I did wonder if I was making too big of a deal of it. I didn't want to offend her.
I didn't know what to do or how to help her.
I wanted to ask him if he was thinking about suicide, but I didn't know what to do if he said yes.
I didn't want to be the one to blame if something happened.
I thought to myself, I'll feel better knowing I did something.
I knew someone in the past who had attempted suicide, so I didn't want to risk it.
I would rather have her mad at me than have her hurt or dead.
Even though I didn't know what to do, I knew I had to do something because I really cared about her.
I kept thinking, what if it were me? I'd want a friend to do something.
So I asked him, "Are you thinking about suicide?"
She said yes. So I called the crisis line and got advice on how to help.
So I hugged her and said I'm sorry and offered to spend the afternoon with her so we can talk.
So I shared that I had problems in the past, and I asked if he was comfortable talking to a counselor.
We talked about who could be helpful for extra support for them and decided to call their family and tell them what's been going on.
The more we talked, the more concern she shared for her safety, so we agreed to get the residential advisor involved.
To help a friend with thoughts of suicide, follow 3 important steps. Recognize when they're having thoughts of suicide and respond. Warning signs for suicide include Verbal cues that reveal feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, or feeling trapped. Withdrawal, isolation, changes in mood, changes in sleep patterns, changes in substance use, alcohol or other drugs, giving important possessions away, looking for and obtaining the necessary items to attempt suicide, talking about death or dying if out of the ordinary. Take action and reach out directly or get others involved who can help. Ask directly about suicide. Express concern. Listen with empathy and no judgment. Remind them that help is available. Remind them that they're not alone. Make a referral to a supportive resource like a mental health professional or other campus or community resources.
What are ways that you can identify that somebody is experiencing suicidal ideation or thinking about suicide? I know that this is still part of an uncomfortable conversation, but it's important that we talk about these things to prepare and be able to intervene on somebody's behalf should the situation arise. It's important to recognize that somebody might be suicidal. Reach out, ask if somebody is thinking about killing themselves. This is a really hard question to ask, and there's not necessarily a wrong way to do it. It's just important that you're able to ask the question. If you're not able to ask the question, it's really important that you're able to pull somebody into the situation that can. You can be indirect or you can be direct. Indirect ways is saying, hey, I'm really concerned about you. I've noticed some of these behaviors. Are you having thoughts about harming yourself? Are you having thoughts about ending your life? Or you can be more direct, depending on your comfort level, how you know the person and you know the situation, and you can say, this is what I'm seeing. Are you having thoughts about killing yourself? It's really important to ask the question, and it's important to know that whenever you're asking this question, it's so important to listen. Talking things out can save a life. Listening to somebody in a non-judgmental way can open up a space for them to have a conversation and then get the help that they actually need. Don't try to do everything yourself. Get other people involved. Even if you're really close with the person, it's important to pull in other people and other resources. This might be the RISE office. This might be a counselor or a therapist. This might be a doctor or a parent or a sibling or another friend that knows the person. Don't do it yourself and get other people involved. Another important thing is to not promise secrecy and to not be concerned about being disloyal in a situation. Somebody might be disappointed in you that they confided in you about a really heavy, a really hard topic, and then you went and told somebody else. And it feels like you betrayed something that should have been told in confidence, right? Here in this situation, it is more important to save this person's life than it is to ensure that they don't feel betrayed or that you're being disloyal to them. Having this conversation ends in the result of hoping to save somebody's life and getting them the resources that they need. If persuasion fails, and when I say persuasion here, it means you've talked it out. You've said, I really want you to get help. Is there any way I can help you? Like, what do you need in this situation to not feel like this is your only option? And call your mental health center or local hotline. Texas Tech has a crisis helpline that all students have access to 24/7, even if you're a distant student, you're studying abroad, or you're not in Lubbock or any of our campuses for the time being. You can always call this crisis helpline. It's on the back of your student ID. Or if you believe that somebody is making an attempt at suicide, call 911 immediately and give them as much information as you possibly can. These steps seem severe and heavy, but again, the point is to potentially and hopefully save somebody's life. An element of being able to identify suicidal ideation or suicidal behaviors is knowing some of the signs. This might look like purchasing a weapon or stockpiling pills. This could be prescription pills that are their own or somebody else's. Maybe they've mentioned thoughts of ending their life. Even if it's something that's kind of in passing, this is something to take really seriously. Maybe somebody's making final arrangements or giving away possessions. And this doesn't just look like your regular, I have too many things and I want to get rid of them. I want to have more minimalistic clutter makes me stressed. That's not the same situation as making final arrangements. Final arrangements would be, this is a really important object. I have a lot of sentiment around this, but I want you to have it because you've been a really good friend to me. I'm not going to need it again in the future. Somebody is at a higher risk if they've already experienced a suicide attempt or they've known somebody who has made a suicide attempt. Another sign is decreased interest in things that they previously liked or that they're normally involved in. This might be tied to sudden behavior change in their behavior or personality. They really, really love to do this thing and be social, and now all of a sudden they're isolating, or maybe their hygiene is failing, or they are a student who really, really cares about their grades and is at class every single day, and all of a sudden they've just stopped going to class. This also might look like substance abuse, whether this is alcohol or other substances or other drugs. Or if somebody is in a prolonged state of depression or stress. All the things that we have talked about today kind of lead to this. And being in a prolonged or chronic stressful situation or chronic state of depression is so detrimental to your health that suicidal ideation is often a result of this long-term stress. If you're noticing any of these signs and behaviors in somebody, it's always important to reach out to this person in a non-judgmental way and give yourself plenty of time to talk about the situation at hand. While these are some common signs, this list is not necessarily exhaustive. So if you feel like something is wrong or something is up, something doesn't feel right in a situation, trust your gut.
How can we make sure that we are living in a community and on a campus that is safe for us? Well, I'm here to tell you that we have an acronym that you can use. This acronym is RAIDERS, and this all is rooted in bystander intervention. And so this acronym stands for R, recognize the problem. A, assume responsibility. I, implement resources. D, determine a plan. E, engage others. R, respond. And S, create a safer community. So when you start off in a situation, recognize the problem. And then once you recognize that problem, make sure that you're assuming responsibility and not making an assumption that somebody else will step in. We'll talk more about this in a minute. But then once you've assumed responsibility, implement resources. This can be resources like dialing 911, calling the crisis helpline, or a variety of other emergency related services. This also might look like small things like water is a really good resource, or distractions are a really good resource when trying to intervene in a situation. Determine a plan, figure out exactly what you're going to do and how you're going to intervene. Engage others, ask others to step in with you or help you in whatever plan that you're trying to execute. Respond, and this part is incredibly important. Make sure that you are stepping in and taking action, whether it is calling someone or starting a conversation or whatever that might look like. Just make sure if you see something that you say something and do something. And through all of these, we will create a safer community, not just here at Texas Tech, but also in Lubbock. So what I would like you to do now is write 3 ways that you and your org can help make campus safer for everyone involved. In 2022, only 41% of Texas Tech students reported that they viewed Texas Tech as a campus where we look out for each other. Now, we've talked several times about how vast Texas Tech campus is and the population is here. So 41% is less than half of the over 40,000 students who go to school here. So the only way that we can increase this number is by looking out for one another and making sure that this is a community and a safe place for anyone who lives here or goes to school here. When we talk about bystander intervention and intervening in a situation, we have to talk about this socio-psychological phenomenon called diffusion of responsibility. There has actually been studies done on the streets of New York where an actor was in charge of pretending as if they were injured or sick or whatever that looks like, and seeing how many people would step up and intervene on this situation. So this phenomenon is where a person is less likely to take responsibility or action when other bystanders or witnesses are present. So what this might look like is one person saying, oh, well, I'm not qualified enough, or I don't have time, or I can't really do anything to help. The next person will help. And it is that assumption of that the next person will help that eventually leads to nobody stepping in and intervening in the situation. And that is the diffusion of responsibility. So that is why we encourage anybody who sees something to say something or do something, because the likelihood of somebody else intervening is very low, and it is always that first person who chooses to step in that encourages others to be able to step in as well. So I encourage you that if you have a situation where those alarm bells are going off and you feel that feeling in the pit of your stomach that something's not just right, make sure that you step in and say something or do something.
This QR code is a really, really helpful tool, especially as a student org leader. This QR code, when scanned, will download all of the Texas Tech resources to your contacts in one contact. This will include things like the RISE office, the Counseling Center, Dean of Students, Texas Tech Police, the non-emergency police line, the crisis line, or any other resources that might be useful to you as a student during your time here at Tech, or connecting another student to something. It's really important to have this and never need it versus not having it when you might need it, especially if something happens at, say, midnight and campus offices are closed.
So how do you intervene, or how do you make sure that everyone at Texas Tech is being safe and being taken care of and getting connected to the resources that they need? So what you see here on the left of your screen is exactly how to find Raiders Report. So you can literally Google TTU Raiders Report, and it's going to pop up this list of all of these different reports, including the Student of Concern Report, which you can file if you are worried about a student's mental health and safety. There's also the Title IX report in case of a sexual assault that you hear of that you can report or witness or see in any type of way, food scarcity, Raider relief, and a variety of other reports. These reports are not to get anybody in trouble, but to make sure that students are being taken care of and connected to the correct resources. You can file all of these reports anonymously. However, it is really useful if you do put your contact information so that if there are questions about how to get in contact with that student or how to better support that student, those people can reach out to you. However, if you are uncomfortable with that, feel free to fill them out anonymously. There's also the crisis helpline, and this phone number is on the back of every single student ID. This is a phone number that is available to Texas Tech students 24/7, 365 days a year, even if that student is not on campus. So you can be at home, you can be traveling, and this number still applies to you. So make sure that you're spreading the word about this number and that everyone in your org understands that they have access to this number either by Googling it or by flipping over their student ID. Also, the QR code that you just scanned will also have this in there whenever you download those contacts. Of course, if you have any reporting questions or know of a student who is in crisis, you can always refer them to RISE, whether it be DMing us on social media, calling us, emailing us, or stopping by one of our peer ed tablings or our office, and we'll make sure that student gets connected as well. Now that we're reaching the end of our training, I want to give you all this really incredible opportunity. So RISE offers a variety of programs and workshops and tablings available to you all absolutely free. All you have to do is go to our website or scan this QR code, and this will lead you to how to request a workshop or a tabling or information from RISE. You can even request goodie bags, condoms, menstrual products, and a variety of other things. So these are the different workshops that we have available. RISE and Title IX 101, which is an overview of campus safety and resources, mental health, well-being and stress management. This is very similar to what you've received today. Alcohol and other drugs, bystander intervention, sexual health education, sexual assault prevention and consent education, healthy relationships through the One Love Foundation, or Safe Night Out training. These are all available, like I said, completely free to you. So what I need you to do is just mark whether you acknowledge this statement or not. Also, if you do request a program or workshop from RISE, you will be entered into a raffle, and your student org could win some really cool prizes, and we will do that raffle every semester. So feel free to take very strong note of this, and we'd love to see you out there in the community doing the work. Remember that everything starts with you, and the change truly does start with you. You know your student org better than anybody else, and so you know how to support them. We hope that you feel empowered by this and that you are able to go throughout your time and semesters here knowing that you are supported by Texas Tech and by RISE.
One last QR code before we let you move on. This QR code is directly linked to our social media. So this has educational material and events that are happening around campus for student well-being. You've reached the end of your training with the RISE office. Thank you so much.